Chaim. So we start off this week's Parsha Vayeishev Yaakov, Eretz Buguri Yaakov, and Yaakov settled down. So Rashi says, what does it mean he settled down? For the last 22 years, Yaakov has been wandering around from one place to the other. He's been chased by his brother. He's been tricked by his father-in-law. It's a lot of troubles in his life. And finally, Yaakov says, let me settle down. I need some peace and quiet, some tranquility in my life. Bikesh Yaakov leishev b'shalva. So what did Hashem do? Hashem said, you want tranquility? Your son is going to get sold into slavery now for the next 22 years. And yes, you're not going to have any tranquility in this world. And Rashi continues that very often tzaddikim think that they could live a life of peace, a life of tranquility. And Hashem says to them, isn't it enough that you're going to have peace and tranquility in the world to come? You want to have tranquility in this world as well? So, obvious question is, what's wrong if a tzaddik wants to have peace and tranquility? Why does a tzaddik want peace and tranquility? Is it because he wants to party and have a good time? Because he wants to sit and learn Torah. Why does Yaakov want to have tranquility and peace in his life? Because he wants to be able to serve Hashem, learn Torah. That's what he wants to do. So what's wrong with Yaakov's request? Why does Hashem say no? You could have shalva in the world to come, but in this world you're going to have tzaras, right? Why does Hashem do this? Why do tzaddikim deserve a life of a difficult life? So, the Gemara tells us that when, and the Gemara in Shabbos, the Taflam and Gimel, tells us that when Rav Shimon bar Yochai came out of the cave after spending 13 years in a cave learning Torah with his son, his father-in-law, Rav Pinchas ben Yair, came to greet him, came to see him. Now, Rav Pinchas ben Yair, of course, missed his son-in-law for 13 years. He hadn't seen his son-in-law. And before that, they were very close. They used to learn Torah together all the time. And Rav Shimon bar Yochai used to learn by his father-in-law. And very often, while they were learning, Rav Shimon bar Yochai would have questions. And he would ask his father-in-law. And his father-in-law, Rav Pinchas, was such a big Talmud Chacham that whenever Rav Shimon bar Yochai would ask him a question, he would give him not just an answer, he would give him 12 answers. 12 answers. Right? Can you imagine? Every time he has a question, he gets 12 answers. So now, after 13 years, they haven't seen each other. Rav Pinchas ben Yair comes running to see his son-in-law. And he's a little surprised when he looks at him. He doesn't look to be in such good shape after 13 years in a cave. His skin is all cracked and broken. He would sit buried in the sand for many hours during the day. He would only wear his clothing during davening because he didn't want them to wear out. And on Shabbos. So, the first thing he says is, let's learn together, right? So they start learning together, and he's expecting Rav Shimon to ask him a question. As they're learning, Rav Shimon has no question. Rav Shimon understands everything. So he says, so let's start learning a little deeper. So they start learning a little deeper, and still Rav Shimon understands everything. So they start learning deeper and deeper, and suddenly Rav Pinchas ben Yair realizes that he doesn't understand what they're learning. So he says to Rav Shimon bar Yochai, maybe you could explain to me, I have a question over here. Rav Shimon bar Yochai says, I can answer your question. And he gives him one answer, another answer. He gives him 24 answers. Wow, Ben Yair is amazed, and he starts to cry. So Rav Shimon bar Yochai says, "Why are you crying?" So he says, "Because I'm looking at you, and I see your whole body is your skin is cracked. You look bruised. You look like you suffered a lot over the last 13 years, right? I'm upset that I have to see you like this." So Rav Shimon bar Yochai says, the only reason, the only way that I'll be able to achieve this level in Torah is because I went through this experience. He says, you're lucky to be able to see me like this. Because had you not seen me in this situation, I would never have been able to reach this level in Torah that I achieved now. The Mishnah in Avos tells us, Kachi darka shel Torah. What is the way to acquire Torah? What person wants to acquire Torah? What's the path that he should take? So it says, Pas v'melach toichel, you should eat bread with salt, right? You don't need to eat meat, you don't need to eat chicken, you don't need to have a bunch of salads. Some bread and salt. You should drink a small measure of water. Ala oretz tishan, you should sleep on the earth, on the ground, right? You should occupy yourself with Torah. That's the way to acquire Torah. Hashem designed the world in a way that a person who wants to lay down on a comfortable bed, eat fancy foods, and have an enjoyable life, so he's going to be able to learn Torah, but he's not going to be able to truly acquire Torah. The Gemara in Tainus tells us that Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav that every day a heavenly voice rings out from Mount Chayre, from Har Sinai, and makes the following proclamation. Right? There are many proclamations that come out every day from Har Sinai. This is one of them, at least in those times, that came out every day. It said, the entire world is sustained in the merit of my son, Rabbi Hanina ben Doisa. The whole world is supported in his merits. And he himself, what does he eat all week?
Carob.
He eats a basket of carob. That's all him and his family eat all week. So Reb Chaim Shmulevitz says, the first half of the proclamation I can understand, right? The whole world needs to know. Reb Hanina ben Doisa is such a big tzaddik, he's sustaining the entire world. But why is the second half of the proclamation important? The fact that he eats carob, is that something everybody needs to know? That he eats carob all week? I'm saying, why is that something so important for everybody to know? I mean, the Gemara wants to tell us is one thing, but Hashem has to make an announcement on Har Sinai that Rabbi Hanina ben Doisa all week long eats carob? Why do I need to know this? So Reb Chaim Shmulevitz says the second half is explaining the first half of the proclamation. How did Rabbi Hanina ben Doisa reach a level that in his merit the whole world is able to be sustained? It's because he lived a simple life and he dedicated his life to serving Hashem. He didn't want to have an enjoyable, pleasurable life, which would have prevented him from reaching the level that he attained. The Gemara tells us that Rabbi Hanina ben Doisa was so poor that in their house, even for Shabbos, they very often didn't have money to buy bread for Shabbos. And Rabbi Hanina ben Doisa's wife was a little bit embarrassed on Friday afternoon because you would walk down the street and everybody was busy cooking for Shabbos, right? And there was smoke rising out of all the chimneys on the street. And in their house, the chimney was, no smoke coming out of it, right? Their oven was empty. So she took some pieces of wood and she would throw them into the oven to make smoke come out of the chimney, right? So they had a very annoying and nosy neighbor who liked sticking her nose into other people's business, and she was very curious what's going on. There's a lot of smoke coming out of their chimney. I know they don't have a lot of food for Shabbos, so what's going on? What are they cooking all day? So she comes to the front door, to Rabbi Hanina's front door, and Rabbi Hanina's wife is very embarrassed. The neighbor's coming to check on her. She realizes what the neighbor's coming to look at, so she runs into the bedroom. So the neighbor walks into the house. I guess the door wasn't locked. She lets herself in, and she walks over to the oven, and she can't believe her eyes. The oven is full of freshly baked challahs, right? And they're ready to be taken out. So she calls out to Rabbi Hanina's wife. She says, the bread is ready. Quickly, bring the shovel. They had a special shovel they used to take the bread out of the oven. So Rabbi Hanina ben Doisa's wife said, she walks out of the room holding the shovel. She said, that's why I went into the bedroom. I went to get the shovel, right? So the commentaries explain she wasn't lying. When she saw the neighbor coming, she knew that Hashem is going to perform a miracle for her. She was so sure that Hashem is going to perform a miracle for her that she ran to get the shovel. You can pass the chips down. The Gemara continues that after this story, she was a little bit upset at her husband. She said, listen, it's one thing, we want to live a simple life, but, all the neighbors are talking about us. And, you're a big tzaddik. It's not right that we should live on carob all week. Maybe you should daven to Hashem that you should give us some more, you should give us a little bit of food. So, Rabbi Hanina ben Doisa says, okay, fine. If that's what you want, I'll daven to Hashem that he should give us some money. So Rabbi Chanina goes, he davens to Hashem that he should get food, that Hashem should give him money, he should be able to feed his family, give his family good food instead of eating carib all week. And a hand stretches out from the heavens and comes down holding a golden table leg. And it hands the golden table leg to Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa. Okay, Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa is very excited. Okay, now they're going to be able to sell the golden table leg and they're going to have plenty of money. He's going to be able to support his family. They're going to have plenty of food. That night, Rabbi Chanina's wife has a dream, and she sees herself in the world to come in Gan Eden, and they're surrounded by tzaddikim, are all sitting in Gan Eden together. Each tzaddik and his wife are sitting at a table. They have their table, and they're sitting at golden tables. And all the tables in heaven have 3 legs. They don't have 4 legs like the tables over here. The tables in heaven have 3 legs. But Rabbi Chanina at his wife's table only has 2 legs. Now, a table with 3 legs could stand. A table with 2 legs doesn't stand very well. And she wakes up and she says to her husband, you know, if the golden table leg that we got is taking away from our portion in the world to come, then I don't want it. Right? Return it. Return to sender, right? I don't know what the return policy is. In heaven, so Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa went and he davened to Hashem. And a hand appeared, and it took back the golden table leg. And the Gemara says that the second miracle was actually greater than the first miracle, because it's very common for Hashem to give, but for Hashem to take, that doesn't happen very often. It shows on the great merit of Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa. So the reason why the Gemara tells this to us, the Gemara is teaching us a lesson, right? How did Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa reach the tremendous level that he reached, that he was able to sustain the entire world in his merit? It's all because of the fact that Rabbi Chanina and his family lived on a basket of carib the entire week. Now, why is this the case? Why did Hashem design the world in such a way that a person who wants to achieve a high level in Torah, a person who wants to connect with Hashem, why does he have to live like this? So in the city of Vayeishev, there was a big problem. It was short right after Rosh Hashanah, and the news spreads that there's a shortage of esrogim this year. Right? Some of the ships that were supposed to deliver the esrogim, they got caught up in storms, and you can't find. There's no esrogim to be found. Right? There's only a couple of weeks to Sukkot, and the Jewish community in Vayeishev sends out messengers to all the nearby cities to try to buy an esrog, and they all come back empty-handed. Right, it's getting Kippur passes by. There's only 4 days left to Sukkot, and they're frantically traveling around from city to city trying to get an esrog. Right, in those days, not everybody had their own esrog, but every city, every town had an esrog that the whole community would share together. And the whole city of Vayeishev doesn't have an esrog, and Sukkot is about to come. And what are they going to do? How are they going to do the mitzvah? They're going to miss out on this very important mitzvah. Finally, 2 days before Yom Tov, Baruch, a businessman, is traveling through Vayeishev, and he has with him an esrog. He just managed. He's traveling from Lemberg, whatever, and he managed to acquire an esrog. He paid a lot of money for it, and he's going back home for Yom Tov. So the people of Vayeishev say to Baruch, listen, maybe you could sell us your esrog. He says, crazy. I traveled so far and I paid so much money for the esrog. I would never give it away. It's a mitzvah. So they say, well, then maybe you could stay in Vayeishev for Yom Tov, right? At least that way we can all use your esrog. And he says, no, I want to go home. I want to spend Yom Tov with my family. I'm not, I don't know anybody in Vayeishev. So they say, you have to talk to our Rebbe, the Tzaddik, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Vayeishev. So Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Vayeishev calls him in, and he says, listen, Baruch, whatever price you want to name, we'll pay any amount of money for an esrog. We need an esrog. The Jewish community in Vayeishev needs an esrog. And Baruch says, I'm sorry, I'm not willing to sell, and I don't really want to stay here. It's not, I don't need money. Baruch Hashem, I have everything I need. So Rabbi Levi Yitzchak says, you know what? I can offer you something better than money. If you agree to stay with us in Vayeishev for Yom Tov, I promise you that you will be with me in Gan Eden. such an offer you can't turn down. You can't refuse to be with Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev in Gan Eden. Of course. No question that. You immediately send somebody to bring his family over to Berditchev, right? He's going to, for such a reward, such an offer, you can't turn such a thing down. Once in a lifetime opportunity. Okay, they rent a room in the local inn in Berditchev, and Yom Tov comes. He's so excited. He goes to Shul. The first night of Yom Tov, they daven in Shul, and Baruch comes back to the inn, and he's shocked. He comes into his room in the hotel, and the table in his room is set, and there's chalas and wine, and everything's set out on the table. He says, "What's going on over here? It's Sukkot." So he rushes outside, and he sees outside of the inn there's a little sukkah, and the innkeeper sitting there with his family. So he rushes back into his room, he takes some of the challah, and he rushes outside to the sukkah. And the innkeeper says, "No, sorry, this is my personal sukkah. You could eat inside." So he says, "But it's sukkahs. You have to eat in a sukkah." He says, "Okay, listen, you paid for your room in the inn. You didn't pay for a sukkah. The rooms in this inn don't come with a sukkah." Okay, fine. You don't want to let me into your sukkah. I'll find somewhere else to eat. So he goes over to the next house. He knocks on the door. He says, "I need a place to eat. Can I eat in your sukkah?" "I'm sorry, we're full. We're very full. There's no room in my sukkah." He goes to the next house, and he's knocking from door to door, and nobody wants to let him into their sukkah. After about a half an hour of going around to almost all the sukkahs in town, he realizes that there's something behind this, right? There's a reason why no one's letting him into their sukkah. So he rushes to the sukkah of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, and he says, "Rebbe, what are you doing to me? Why did you tell everybody not to let me into their sukkahs?" So Rabbi Levi Yitzchak says, "Listen, you want to eat in a sukkah? You're welcome to join me and come into my sukkah, but there's a price." "What's the price to eat in the Rebbe's sukkah?" "You have to give me back my portion of a Gan Eden that I promised you. You have to release me from my promise that you'll be with me in Gan Eden." Baruch says, "What? The only reason I agreed to stay in Berditchev for Yom Tov is because I wanted to be with you in Gan Eden." So he says, "Okay, that's fine, but if you want to eat in a sukkah, you have to release me of the promise." Right? What should he do? Right? This is a once in a lifetime opportunity to be with an offer to be with the Rebbe in Gan Eden. Right? But on the other hand, it's Sukkot. How could a Jew not eat in a sukkah the first night of Yom Tov? He doesn't know. He's thinking it over in his mind, and he says, there's nothing greater than being in Gan Eden with a tzaddik. But how can if I have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, how could I say I'm not going to do this mitzvah because I want a special portion in Gan Eden? So he says to the Rebbe, "Listen, Rebbe, if that's the price, I'm willing to pay the price, and I release you of your promise, and I want to come and join you in your sukkah." I believe Yitzchak's face lights up, a big smile appears on his face. He invites Baruch in the Kiddush. He starts to eat, and Rabbi Yitzchak tells him, "Rabbi Baruch, I want to tell you that I'm making you a new promise now, and I promise you that you will merit to sit with me in Gan Eden. However, I made the promise a few days ago. At that point, if you would have gone in Gan Eden based on that promise, you wouldn't have deserved it. You wouldn't have earned it. And a person who gets a portion of Gan Eden that they don't really deserve doesn't really enjoy it and doesn't really appreciate it, right? In order for you to really enjoy the portion of Gan Eden, I realized that you had to earn it. And that's why I put you through this test. Now you've truly earned this special portion of Gan Eden that you're going to receive." The Yerushalmi tells us that a person who gets bread, who is given bread that they did not earn, is embarrassed to eat it. It's called Nama de Kisufa, bread of shame, bread of embarrassment. They're embarrassed when they eat it, and they don't really enjoy it. Right? Something that a person who works for, they enjoy. Right? The Gemara in Bava Metzia says, a person would rather eat something that he worked for, something that he produced. He would rather eat one loaf of bread that he produced than get 9 loaves of bread that were given to him as a gift, given to him by somebody else. The Ramchal writes that this is why Hashem designed the world in such a way. Hashem could have designed the world that we sit around and do nothing, and Hashem showers us with reward. But you know what? We won't enjoy the reward. We won't appreciate the reward. We won't enjoy it. We'll be embarrassed to receive the blessings of Hashem. And therefore Hashem, in His ultimate kindness, designed the world in such a way that we have to earn our reward. Right? Hashem is giving us the reward out of kindness. Hashem is giving us Gan Eden, Olam Haba out of kindness. But He wants us to work for it. And the harder we work for it, the more effort we put into it, the higher level we can reach. And that's why a person who truly wants to reach a level of Torah, wants to reach the highest levels in Torah study, he has to be willing to go through a challenging and difficult life in order to reach this high level. And this is why Hashem turns to Yaakov. He says, Yaakov, if you want to live an easy life, that's not a problem, but you're not going to be able to achieve what you have to achieve. If you want to be able to be one of the three patriarchs, to be Yaakov Avinu, the Bechir Shabbat, the chosen one of the three patriarchs, you have to go through these challenges in your life. That will enable you to reach the level that you are able to reach. That is the Darka Shel Torah. That is the path to acquire the Torah. And to conclude with a final story, in the year 1212, in the city of Worms, there was a guy, one of the judges in the city of Worms was Rab Baruch, and he had a son. His son was Rab Meir. Rab Meir, from a young age, became known as a great scholar. He traveled to France, to Paris, to learn in the yeshiva of Rabbeinu Yechiel of Paris. He was there in 1244, I think it was, when the French government burnt all the books of the Talmud in France, and he published a special song, a kinus, a song lamenting and mourning for the destruction of the Talmud, which we still read today. It's read, I think on Tisha B'Av we read it. And after this, he traveled back to Germany, and he settled in the city of Rothenburg in Germany. And he became known as a mayor of Rothenburg, the Maharam. His name was shortened to his acronym, Maharam, Reb Meir of Rothenburg. He established a yeshiva with some of the greatest Torah scholars of his generation, studied under him, Rabbeinu Asher, the Rosh, the Mordechai, the Sagas Maimonides, the Sharidura, the Zarua, and many of the leading Torah scholars studied under Reb Meir. However, in the year 1266, around the year 1266, in the 1260s, it became very, very difficult for Jews to live in Germany. They began to be persecuted by the Gentiles around them, and the government, who agreed to provide protection for the Jewish people, but this protection came at a very high price. They had to pay extremely high levels of tax, to a point where it was almost impossible for a Jew to live in Germany. And the Jews in Germany started to look for different places to go to. Many Jews in Germany actually traveled east to Poland, to Lithuania, where they settled and established communities over there. And other Jews traveled south to Italy, and from there they traveled to Eretz Yisrael. And Reb Meir realized that he can't continue living in Rothenburg. He has to leave. But in order to leave the country, you have to get permission from the government. And the government was not ready to let the Jews leave. This was their piggy bank. This was their source of income, right? They weren't going to let any Jews leave. So the Jews had to, leave without getting permission. So Reb Meir traveled south towards Italy. He came to, I think, Lombardy. And as he's traveling through Lombardy, he's a Jewish apostate, a Jew who had left his religion. His name, I think, was Kempe. Was traveling with the Archbishop of Lombardy, and he recognized Rabbeinu Meir. And he turns to the Archbishop and he says, "You know who this is? This is the greatest rabbi in Germany, and he's trying to sneak out of the country." So immediately they ordered Rabbi Meir to be arrested, and they sent him back to the king, to King Rudolf. Rudolf I, who was king of Germany at that time, who had him imprisoned in the fortress of Ensisheim. Not sure where that is, like somewhere near Worms. Immediately, 12 of the leading rabbis in Germany went to speak to the king. Right? Why did you imprison Reb Meir? He's trying to flee the country without permission. Okay, what can we do to get him released? The king says, if you want to have him released, you're going to have to raise a tremendous sum. Either in some versions, 20,000 gold coins, in some versions, 23,000, even 30,000, in other versions of the story. It was a tremendous amount of money. I'm not sure how much 20,000 gold coins today would be around $40 million, $50 million, right? A tremendous sum. But this is the greatest rabbi in Germany, right? This is something you have to do. So immediately, Rabbeinu Asher, the student of Reb Meir, accepted upon himself. He said to the king, "I'm gonna raise the money for you," and he went around and he started collecting money to release the greatest rabbi in Germany, to release the Maharam. And it took some time, but they were able to put together the money. They put together whatever the amount was, 20,000 gold coins. 100 million, okay. Wow. More than I thought, right? So they managed to put together $100 million, and they came, and as they're putting the money together, and he went to visit Reb Meir, went to visit his teacher to tell him the good news. So they let him come into the prison, and he tells Reb Meir, my teacher, I'm here with good news. You're going to be released very soon. And Reb Meir says, how is that possible? The king agreed to release me. Why would the king agree to release me? And students tell him, because we raised $100 million to have you released. Reb Meir says, absolutely not. I do not agree to have the money given over to the king to release me. Why not? Because if you give the king $100 million to release me, you know what's going to happen tomorrow? 10 more rabbis are going to be arrested, and you're going to have to pay another $100 million to release them. If we don't pay the king money, you're going to stay in prison. He's not going to, he doesn't have any plans to release you. So our mayor says, if that's the price that I need to pay, then I'm willing to stay in prison, right? I don't want, I don't want all the other rabbis' lives to be in danger. I don't want to have other rabbis starting to be arrested because I raised money to have myself released. So he stayed in prison. He actually stayed in prison for the rest of his life, for another 7 years. Now, while he was in prison, he was not allowed to bring in any books with him. But in the prison itself, they had ink and parchment for him, and he began writing down from memory. The Torah that he was a scholar on his level. The whole Torah he knew by heart. And from prison, he began corresponding, writing. People began writing to him, asking him halachic questions, and he responded from prison. He usually wrote at the end of many letters. He writes, I'm writing this. I don't have the books in front of me. I'm writing based on what I remember. In some places, he wrote, I might be wrong. If you find other sources, I don't have those sources in front of me. But he was somebody who knew the entire Torah by heart. But there was one thing that bothered him. What bothered him? Even though he had the whole Torah in his memory, but 3 times a week, on Monday, Thursday, and Shabbos, we're supposed to read from the Torah. And he had no Torah to read from. You can't read the Torah from memory, right? You can't do Kriyas HaTorah without a Sefer Torah. And this bothered him very much, and he began to pray to Hashem. He said, Hashem, I want to be able to read from the Torah. Right? You're not supposed to go 3 days without reading from the Torah. And that night he had a dream. And in his dream, Malach Gavriel appeared to him. And he was holding a Sefer Torah. And he says to Reb Meir, this Torah was written by Moshe Rabbeinu. On the last day of Moshe's life, on the 7th day of Adar, Moshe Rabbeinu wrote 13 Sifrei Torah. 12 Torahs he gave out to the 12 tribes. And the 13th Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu was, I think, buried with Moshe. He took it up to heaven. So this is the 13th Sefer Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote, and he placed it on the table next to Reb Meir. Meir woke up, right? It was a dream, but his whole cell he sees is full of light, and he looks at the table, and there it is. There's the Torah, right? He's so excited. He has a Torah from Moshe Rabbeinu, but he realized that the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu was not something that's going to stay for very long. And he immediately took some parchment and quill, some quill, ink, and parchment, and he began copying the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. And he wrote. And you're allowed to write a Torah. You're not allowed to write a Torah from memory, but you're allowed to write one Torah from another Torah. And he copied over the entire Torah. And after he finished copying over the entire Torah, he had a dream that Malach Gabriel came back and took the Torah back up to heaven. But he now had a copy of the Torah that he had written, that he was able to use for the next 7 years. After 7 years, when he realized that his time, it would be his time soon to leave this world, he didn't want to leave this Holy Torah with him in prison. So he somehow managed to get wood in his cell, and he made a little box. He put the Torah in the box, and it seems like the fortress that he was in overlooked a river. Not sure which river it was, but it was a river that flowed from there straight to the city of Worms. And he lowered the box into the river. It flowed down the river to the city of Worms. The fishermen who were on the river tried to grab it, but it ran away from them. They weren't able to touch it. Finally, some Jewish fishermen came, and the box went directly towards them, and they opened it up, and they found letter from Reb Meir saying this is the Torah that he wrote in prison. From what I know, the Torah actually was in the Jewish community in Worms for the next 600 years. I think until the Holocaust, they had that Torah in the city of Worms. There were many times that there were questions arose about how to write different words in the Torah, and they would go to Worms to check in that Torah from the Maharam. Even after the Maharam passed away, I think King Rudolph had already passed away by then, but they still didn't want to release his body. They wanted a very high ransom. They didn't want to ask for 20,000 gold coins anymore, but they still wanted a very high price. And Reb Meir wrote before he passed away that if they asked for an unusually high price, the Jews should not agree to pay it. And his body remained imprisoned for 13 years. Baruch Hashem, it stayed completely fresh. It did not, there was no change to the body over the 13 years. After 13 years, finally the king agreed. They wanted to get rid of the body. What are they going to do with the body they have for 13 years? So he agreed to release it for a very small amount, just a token. A small amount, just as you don't want to release it for free, but it was a very small amount of money. And even then, the rabbi said that the Jewish community should not raise the funds to release the body, but they said if anybody wants to, any individual person wants to pay for it, they can do it. And a rich Jew by the name of Rabbi Alexander Ziskin put together the money, and he had the body taken out and buried. And his condition was he's going to pay for the burial of Reb Meir if he can be buried alongside him. And until today, in the city of Worms, you can actually see the two graves are still there. They survived. They're still there today. Even though most of the cemetery was destroyed, but these two graves remain side by side there until today. Now, many years later, in the times of the Rebbe Rashab was traveling through Germany with the great Chassid Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Schneerson, the father of the Rebbe's father, the Lubavitch Rebbe's father. And when they came near Worms, the Rebbe Rashab said, "I want to go see." Of course, they went to the kever, to the grave of the Maharam, but he said, "I want to see the cell where he was locked up." So they went to the fortress where he was locked up, and they agreed to let them in. But it seems like there had been renovations over time, and they told him the only way you can't really go. The only way to get to the cell is you have to They told him he has to lay down on the ground and stick his head under like in a little window that's near the ground to be able to see inside the cell. That's what they told him. So the Rebbe Rashab lays down on the ground and he starts putting his face near the window. And Rebbe Yitzchak, the chassid, sees his Rebbe laying there on the floor. I don't know how clean the floor was. And he says, Rebbe, what are you doing? It's you couldn't believe his Rebbe is laying down like that. And the Rebbe Rashab said that to see this holy spot where Rab Meir spent 7 years to see such a holy spot, he says, I'm willing to lay down on the dirty ground in order to see it. Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, the Vayeishev, had an angel who would appear to him, a Maggid who would appear to him and teach him Torah. He wrote down all the teachings of this Maggid in the book Maggid Meisharim. And this angel told the Vayeishev, told Rabbi Yosef Karo, that whenever you have a halachic ruling from the Maharam, from a mayor of Rottenburg, the halacha always follows him. Why? Why does the halacha always follow him? Right? There were many great Torah scholars in generation who have different opinions. Why do you always need to follow him? So he says because the 7 years that he spent in prison refined him and allowed him to reach such a high level in Torah that no one else was able to reach. And this is what the Torah is telling us in this week's Parsha. Kachi darka shel Torah. Mishnah Berkiyave says this is the way to achieve Torah. A person who is willing to spend 7 years in prison, right, studying Torah, right, can achieve the highest level. The person who's willing to live a difficult life, to go through challenges, is able to achieve a higher level in holiness. And this is what Hashem is telling Yaakov in this part. So yes, of course, you want to live an easy life. It's not a problem to live an easy life. But if you want to achieve the level of Yaakov Avinu, the Bechir Shabbat, you have to be willing to go through difficulties. You have to be able to go through challenges. Now, Baruch Hashem, we all have much easier lives than Yaakov Avinu. We all have easier lives than the Maharam. But we all have challenges in our own life. Right? And there are times when we look at Hashem and we say, Hashem, why couldn't you just make everything a little easier? Right? And Hashem tells us that if you really want to achieve the highest levels in Torah, you want to achieve a true connection with Hashem, the only way to do that is, Hashem could just give it to us, but then we wouldn't appreciate it. We wouldn't enjoy it. It would be bread of embarrassment. So the only way to appreciate it, the only way for us to achieve these high levels, to achieve our portion in Olam Haba, to reach, to be with Rabbi Levi Yitzchak in Gan Eden, is if we are willing to earn it, if we're willing to go through those difficulties and go through those challenges. And we have to thank Hashem for giving us these challenges and enabling us to reach the levels that we are able to reach through them. L'chaim, l'chaim.